Sex Trafficking in Southwest Florida. How to Protect Your Children, Both Girls and Boys, by Gina Birch. It's modern-day slavery. Florida is the third most offending state in the nation for it, and going into summer when children have more time on their hands, it's something parents need to be aware of. It is human or sex trafficking, organized criminal activity in which human beings are treated as possessions, controlled, and exploited. A majority of those exploited are juveniles, and trafficking is happening in Southwest Florida. Local law enforcement, prosecutors, medical officials, and advocacy groups are collaborating to combat the problem and asking parents and the public to join the ranks. Lest you think human trafficking, known as HT, occurs only in massage parlors as seen in the news, or with disadvantaged laborers crossing the border, think again. Sergeant Wade Williams, head of Collier County Sheriff's Office Special Crimes Bureau Exploitation Section, says, quote, "A lot of teenage girls we see involved don't even realize the guy they are talking to is a trafficker," end quote. Many girls who fall victim to trafficking were abused or neglected as children. For others, the issue isn't as obvious, but a similar blueprint exists of being vulnerable, having troubles at home, and meeting someone online to share their problems with, who then capitalizes on them. Williams adds, quote, "They use very clever tactics. They talk about vulnerabilities and allow kids to break rules like having a drink or viewing pornography. If the child tells on their new friend, they will also be telling on themselves," end quote. So they remain quiet, and the exploitation intensifies. And parents of boys, take note, they can also be targeted. Christy Ivy is president and founder of Christy's Cause, a Southwest Florida-based nonprofit organization dedicated to eradicating child sex trafficking through education, awareness, restoration, and justice initiatives. The stories she tells of local HT cases are shocking to many people. Take, for instance, the 17-year-old Lee County girl working at a fast food restaurant who simply asked her boss for additional shifts to make money. Ivy says, quote, "Her boss, a woman she trusted to take care of her, introduced her to a man who raped her and forced her into a life of sex work," end quote. Most trafficking victims don't come forward out of fear. One of Ivy's goals is to educate the public, medical community, and law enforcement on how to recognize signs of trafficking victims and action they can take to potentially save victims. Nurses and other healthcare professionals are on the front lines, including Jennifer Wolf, a Lee Memorial Hospital ER nurse and board member of Christy's Cause. She says, quote, "In 2015, shortly after joining Christy's board, I sat in a mandatory training at the hospital. They taught me the red flags of trafficking, but if I'm in a room with a patient, I still have no idea what to do next. I felt a burden on my heart. If I have these questions, I'm sure my colleagues do too," end quote. Wolf says Lee Health was ahead of the curve by having a human trafficking policy since 2015. But it needed some fine-tuning. She was instrumental in creating a detailed protocol for healthcare professionals who suspect a patient is being trafficked, so they know how to take action. It worked in the case of a 16-year-old girl who arrived at the hospital in Fort Myers at 3 a.m. Her complaints were vague. When parents were called for authorization to treat, it was discovered they lived out of town and wouldn't come get her. When ready to be discharged, she didn't know the name of the friend picking her up. Neither did that person know the girl's name, referring to her by a nickname. Red flags mounting, her care team called law enforcement, which uncovered the girl was involved in an open trafficking case in Miami. Ivy says, quote, "What's even more shocking is that her trafficker alleged to have had at least 200 girls working for him, some of whom were allegedly attending Cape Coral High School." Traffickers often lure victims through grooming. Perpetrators may feign romantic interest in children or teens, compliment them, buy them gifts, take them out, and isolate them from friends and family. Quote, "At some point the relationship will turn violent, and typically there is some kind of blackmail involved, a video made without their knowledge, showing them in a compromising position, or a threat to harm family members, something the perpetrator is holding over the victim," end quote, says Ivy. Talk to your children. Williams says, People fall for new frauds every day. If you have a conversation with your kids and they know about these tactics, the less likely they are to fall victim to them, end quote. Ivy adds, quote, teach children the proper names for your body parts. If they use those terms, it's an indication to would-be offenders they've likely been educated about good touch, bad touch as well, end quote. Good touch, bad touch conversations don't have to be about sexuality. An example is that no one should touch your children in an area that their bathing suit covers. In turn, they shouldn't touch anyone else in those areas. Conversations about internet safety are of extreme importance. While it may seem obvious to adults, make sure your children know to never give out personal information, including birthdays and addresses. A common way children are contacted and exploited is through cell phone apps and social media sites offering private chat features. Williams says, quote, Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat together account for most of our cases, end quote. He says to also be wary of TikTok, Whisper, and even online game sites, especially those offering role-playing scenarios. He says, quote, kids advertise their vulnerabilities and problems on there. Predators are also there saying, hey, come over here, end quote. As more apps and social media sites come online, the bigger the technology gap grows between parents and children. Williams warns, quote, parents aren't paying attention. They're not aware. They don't have the skills or, frankly, sometimes the willpower to monitor kids' activities online. It's confusing. They're busy. It can be overwhelming, but it's imperative, end quote. At the very least, he advises putting parental monitoring on devices, restricting access to inappropriate content. Find them under Screen Time in the settings of Apple devices. For Android users, look for Family Link. Parents can also download apps restricting access to sites with content such as pornography. They can monitor children's activities and set other screen limits. Require computer time to be in a common area, not behind a locked door in the bedroom. Above all, teach children to listen to their gut when it comes to strangers and any promises or propositions that seem too good to be true. Ivy says, quote, if it feels wrong, it probably is, end quote. Know the red flags. Francine Donaromo says, quote, if your child or their friends are running away and staying with boys, that's a red flag. They have no resources to take care of themselves and could be an indication that they are being victimized, end quote. Donaromo prosecutes offenders as chief of the 20th Judicial Circuit Court State's Attorney's Office Special Victims Unit and is on the board of Christie's Cause. She advises teachers if one of their students, quote, gets all dolled up and leaves in the middle of school, that's another sign, end quote. Donaromo recalls a case in which a teenager without a driver's license started driving a friend's car to get her nails done. She says, quote, she didn't have a job and wasn't going to school. That's another red flag for human trafficking. Ivy says, quote, if something strikes you as odd, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-373-7888 or call 911 and let them investigate, end quote. One way she categorizes odd is an apparent girlfriend-boyfriend relationship in which the man appears a lot older, is controlling, speaking for the girl, and or controlling her personal identification, such as a driver's license. In addition to public awareness, Christie's Cause continues to expand its professional education arm known as We Care. Partnering with Lee Health, it provided free continuing education on human trafficking to more than 400 registered nurses in 2019. Wolf says the training has increased the number of human trafficking victims the healthcare system has been able to identify and rescue. Ivy does the same for law enforcement, partnering with the National Center for Missing Children. Her organization provides human trafficking training typically given to police in specialty units only to officers who are patrolling the streets on a daily basis. Not only are sex crimes the most underreported crime, Donaromo says less than 1% of sex trafficking victims are ever identified. That's one reason she's excited about the massive data project Christie's Cause is spearheading called HT Counts. She says, quote, there is nothing like this being done anywhere else in the state, end quote. The data gathered would provide insight into HT patterns and trends, as well as the needs of victims who require protection, housing, social services, drug treatment, and more. She says, quote, "We have to combat this as a community. It can't just be prosecutors and law enforcement. We have seen a light shone upon the ills of human trafficking and made people aware of the problem. The public still has a long way to go, but we're getting there." These websites offer info about human trafficking, including statistics, resources, and helplines. Christie's Cause, christiescause.com. Christie's Cause works to eradicate child sex trafficking through education, awareness, and justice initiatives. Human Trafficking Awareness Partnership and Artreach, humantraffickingawareness.org. Fort Myers-based Human Trafficking Awareness Partnerships conducts outreach programs with area groups to spread awareness and give children the tools they need to describe their understanding of the dangers of trafficking. The National Human Trafficking Hotline, humantraffickinghotline.org. Polaris Project, polarisproject.org. U.S. Department of State, state.gov/policy-issues/human-trafficking.